There has been just some absolutely bonkers movement by the Trump campaign now so far. First started with the interview that vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance gave to NBC News' Meet the Press, asked about a national abortion ban. Now, as Kristen Welker points out, Democrats multiple times said that Trump would pass a national abortion ban. J.D. Vance says not only would Trump not sign it, he would actually veto it. Let's take a listen.
Democrats made the case this week and beyond this week that Donald Trump, if elected, will impose a federal ban on abortion if he wins. Now, Donald Trump says he won't, but can you commit, Senator, sitting right here with me today, that if you and Donald Trump are elected, that you will not impose a federal ban on abortion?
I can absolutely commit that, Kristen. And Donald Trump has been as clear about that as possible. I think it's important to step back and say, what has Donald Trump actually said on the abortion question, and how is it different from what Kamala Harris and the Democrats have said? Donald Trump wants to end this culture war over this particular topic. If California wants to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, then Ohio has to respect California and California has to respect Ohio. Donald Trump's view is that we want the individual states and their individual cultures and their unique political sensibilities to make these decisions because we don't want to have a nonstop federal conflict over this issue. The federal government ought to be focused on getting food prices down and getting housing prices down, issues, of course, where Kamala Harris has been a total disaster. So I think Donald Trump is right. We want the federal government to focus on these big economic and immigration questions. Let the states figure out their own abortion policy.
Let me just follow up with you a little bit on that point, because I've been talking to Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham just last week, who've made it very clear that if Donald Trump is elected, if you are elected, they will continue to press this point. Senator Graham said to me, I'm going to keep saying that there should be a federal ban. If such a piece of legislation landed on Donald Trump's desk, would he veto it?
Well, I think it'd be very clear he would not support it. I mean, he said that explicitly. Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the president of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly, that he would.
Actually, he had not said that previously. This is the first time I've heard that he would veto it. But that little exchange there, Krystal, is a real preview of how they are on their back foot right now on the issue of abortion. Let's put this one up on the screen as well. Donald Trump himself from Truth Social, quote, "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights." Reproductive rights, of course, not a phrase you're usually used to hearing from a Republican presidential candidate. So we now have the vice presidential GOP nominee who says that they will veto a federal abortion ban, even though he previously has expressed at least some support for that type of policy in the past. And then Trump saying, my administration will be great for, quote, reproductive rights. This demonstrates just how much the issue is going against them at the campaign level. And I still, to this day, think it is the single biggest existential threat to their entire case for victory.
Yeah, and obviously J.D. Vance is a very difficult messenger on this, given what he's said in his own personal faith and, you know, all of that. Yeah. And the big problem for Trump is, look, end of the day, you're the guy who put the people on the court that overturned Roe versus Wade. So it's not really a messaging bind that they can get themselves out of. I think this is probably the best that they can do, is basically to say, we promise. If you're in California, we're not going to touch your rights. Mississippi women, like, good luck. It is what it is within your state. It's probably the best they can do, but I don't think there's any ameliorating what a damaging issue this is for them, and even more so with Kamala Harris now as the Democratic nominee. I will say, others have pointed this out, that I know there's been some freak out, certainly among pro-life groups, about and we have some examples of that, et cetera. But I do think that if it was any other Republican other than Donald Trump, who has this incredibly, like, force of personality within the Republican Party, the freak out would have been like 100 times greater.
100,000 times.
Yeah,
you're right.
Because it's not only him saying reproductive rights is so hilarious. I mean, that's crazy. Pro-choice language, period, end of story. And the Republican Party is obviously always very careful and strategic about the particular word choice and languages that they use. So for him to say reproductive rights is pretty astonishing. But yeah, I mean, he's able to get away not only with things like that somewhat, but also with the RNC platform. I mean, he stripped a bunch of the pro-life language and also the anti-LGBT language from the Republican Party platform, because he realizes both of these positions are difficult And he himself, he was a New York liberal on social issues previously, prior to wanting to be the Republican Party nominee. So probably still has some sympathy for those cultural positions, even if he is the person who has most aggressively pushed forward the end of Roe versus Wade.
Trump made a deal with the devil. Trump, everybody, look, I'm not going to question anybody's personal faith. As you said, he previously was pro-choice. Okay, became a Republican, now he's
gave money to Planned Parenthood.
All right, so fine. Yeah. I'll accept that on its merits. But the thing is, though, is that he made a deal with the evangelicals to win the 2016 nomination and the election by choosing Vice President Pence. That was a smart electoral play. They did not, in a million years, dream that they would appoint 3 Supreme Court justices who would then overturn Roe versus Wade in such a quick turnaround. And then I have noted this from day one, from the day that Donald Trump launched his presidential campaign. I believe we did a live stream here on the show. And I remember the first thing I said, I go, I might be wrong, but I don't think he said the word abortion once. I don't think he even bragged about Roe versus Wade. Why? Because Trump is actually a good politician. And he understands that this is a complete loser for Republicans. And in fact, I would say this is evidence of how he can be a moderating force when he wants to be in terms of his rhetoric. He uses the cult of personality to force all ththese Republicans who for years have been calling Democrats like genocidal baby terrorists or whatever. And he's like, no, actually, we're reproductive rights now. And everyone's like, oh, Mike Lee and others who are like, oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
But this, though, is the power, the political power of Trump. You also see a huge freak out amongst a lot of pro-life activists and others. Let's put this up there on the screen just as an example. Seth Dillon, Babylon Bee, says, my administration will be indistinguishable from a Democrat's. This is particularly laughable to me, Krystal, because really? It's like my administration can be indistinguishable from Democrats. It's like, guys, not only is he the person who appointed the justices that overturned Roe versus Wade, there is all kinds of federal power, as the Democrats often talk about, through the Help of Human Services, FDA, through I forget, the Hyde Amendment. There's a million different ways that you're substantively different. But the pro-life activists are so used to getting catered and pampered by the entire Republican Party, they don't know what it's like to just be another coalitional group. And in fact, this time around, you're the least popular coalitional group in the entire Republican Party. So again, as a pro-choice person, I'm actually quite happy about this because, frankly, these people are like defund the police activists, except 50,000 times more powerful in terms of their hold on the Republican Party? I see folks out there defending this IVF legislation out of Alabama. They're out there like talking about how Trump and the FDA should prosecute people for abortion pill through the mail. I'm like, are you out of your goddamn minds? Just say politically, right? There's a lot of unpopular political positions. I hate weed. Do you think I'm gonna be like, my candidate needs to endorse, being against marijuana? No, I'm not an idiot, okay? I don't know why is it that compromise is so difficult for a lot of these folks, but I think it's largely that 45 years of political coalition-wise, they have been catered to. And for the first time in their lives, they're like, oh, wait, we're actually deeply unpopular.
I actually have a lot of sympathy for them, even though obviously I don't share the position. I'm much more sympathetic to where they're coming from than you are, because they're looking at this and like, yeah, for 40 years, these politicians have been telling us they agree with us that abortion is murder and that this is like a Holocaust of babies and that this is a genocide of babies. They claim they agreed with us. And now you're like, yeah, but it's fine to murder babies in California, no biggie. If Californians want to murder babies, okay. So if you view this as like a truly moral core issue, let's actually put the next Seth Dillon tweet up on the screen because he elaborated his view here in a way that, again, I don't agree with, but it is sort of cowardly to be like, on an issue that has such moral weight to say that it's okay in one place and not in the other. Like, for example, as a pro-choice person, I don't find it acceptable that women in Mississippi or Alabama or another red state don't have the same rights as a woman in California. And so, from Seth Dillon, this is a much more consistent philosophical position that he's elucidating here. He says, when considering whether an issue should be decided by individual states or whether it should be universally prohibited, the key question is whether the issue involves fundamental human rights. At one point, slavery was left to the states. Some states permitted it while others did not. The outcome was not peace and harmony, but civil war. Eventually, slavery was recognized as a violation of human rights. He goes on to say abortion, like slavery, is a crime against humanity. It devalues and dehumanizes. It treats a certain subset of human individuals as less than to justify stripping away the rights and dignity for the benefit of another. Just as the moral atrocity of slavery could not be left to the discretion of individual states, neither should abortion. It doesn't matter how popular it is with suburban women. Obviously, I have the polar opposite view of this, right? I think, women being able to have their own choices and what we've seen in the horrors of the post-Roe landscape. Like, I don't think that women in Mississippi should be allowed to bleed out in a parking lot waiting for their life to actually be technically deemed by a doctor who's afraid of being prosecuted at risk. I don't think women should be surveilled, if they use a menstrual tracking app. I don't think they should be surveilled and have that data given to police to track whether they cross state lines to get an abortion. I think that should be nationwide. His position here is ideologically much more morally consistent than the, yes, we think it's fine to murder babies in California, but not in Mississippi line. Okay. But the problem is, and again, as a leftist, I very much sympathize with the position that they're in. Where else are you going to go?
Yeah.
Where else are you going to go? And so that's why Trump feels perfectly at ease throwing them completely under the bus, which he has done absolutely at this point, because he knows at the end of the day, they're not going to vote for Democrats. They're going to vote for him. And if he gets more Supreme Court picks, he's probably going to put more people on the bench who back up Amy Coney Barrett et al.
But then that's why the slavery example is, it's like, okay, dude, if you believe that, then you are actually saying you should fight a civil war. So where are you? Where's your arms? Like, if you believe that, then you would support, which they always say they don't support violence and all this other stuff. No, I mean, that the logical history and reading of all of that, John Brown and, Harper's Ferry Raid, et cetera, then act like it, but they don't, okay? And that's what I'm talking about, is that they morally are always grandstanding on, but then politically have been willing to play ball in the past. Like, for example, going with somebody like Donald Trump, a literal New York liberal, to work within the political process to achieve their aims. So when they want to achieve something which is in their aims, and they're very willing to do compromise, but whenever somebody goes against it, then they're not willing to do compromise. And that is why it annoys the crap out of me, is because they acted like a normal political movement for 40-something years to exert political power, compromising with various different candidates, et cetera, and working within the system. And then when it goes against them on popular opinion, now all of a sudden it's the moral, genocide, et cetera. It's like, well, you got to pick one, okay? And that's why I don't have a lot of sympathy, because whenever you are, but again, like, then you should, if it's slavery, then you should be acting like it, but you're not. It's like you're living your life in a normal way, which, by the way, is how most people dealt with slavery, and ultimately the way that it was accomplished was both through civil war and through the political process. So that's actually just how living in a literal society works, in a multi-ethnic, homogenous, or multi-ethnic, heterogeneous society with various different political coalitional interests. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for that rhetoric, because if it was true, they would be acting totally differently.
Well, it's instructive to think about how they ended up with Mike Pence on the ticket, which was their pick.
Yeah.
And how they ended up with these particular Supreme Court justices who were ideologically completely committed to overturning Roe versus Wade, which of course they ultimately did. And that's because at the time, Trump genuinely feared that they may not vote for him. He no longer fears that.
No, and he shouldn't.
And he didn't have to go through a real primary process. When you recall the Republican primary, one did exist, unlike on the Democratic side, but he didn't participate in the debates. So he basically sort of remained above that primary process and wasn't subjected to, you remember some of the back and forth between like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley on the stage about how they'd be on abortion, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't have to go through that process, didn't have to make any promises to anyone about anything. And so now he realizes that this is the most unpopular part of the Republican Party platform, especially post-Roe versus Wade, because that's the other thing. The numbers have shifted against them as people have reckoned with what this reality actually means. And so he's doing everything he can to cut his losses here. But, I guess I say I have more sympathy for them because, again, people like Donald Trump, people like certainly Mike Pence, all of these Republicans who, raised so much money and garnered so much support and, became so famous in this movement, claiming that they view things the way that Seth Dillon lays out here. Like, at the end of the day, it turns out to be completely hollow, which the pro-life movement, I think, long suspected that was the case. But I see it much more as the moment that this became politically inconvenient for the Republican Party, they, all the stated principles of the past suddenly are just completely wiped clean. And, again, on the political calculus, I don't think that this is really Kamala Harris is going to be favored on abortion rights, period, of end of story. If this election is about abortion rights, she's going to win massively, right? It's not going to be even particularly close. The thing that keeps him in it, obviously, is that there are a host of other issues that people also obviously very, very concerned about, but this has been a really energizing factor on the Democratic side. But yeah, there's no fear from Donald Trump that this coalition is going to go elsewhere. The Democratic Party is 100% pro-choice at this point. There is no real third-party candidate that's just running on I'm pro-life, that's my thing, vote for me if your protest vote. That doesn't exist. So they have nowhere else to go. And probably even the most stridently pro-life person has another set of issues that are more likely to align with Donald Trump and the Republican Party. So, he feels like he can just throw them under the bus, even in spite of the fact that back when he was trying to win their vote originally in 2016, he was saying we should criminalize the women and really trying to position himself as being very, very pro-life when it was not really true.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, I spent too much of my childhood getting preached at by evangelicals. So I find them especially triggering on this. But it just comes down to this. They don't want to reckon with the fact, with this most basic insight, we live in a society. I'm sorry that, the funny thing is, the reason, and again, this is why I don't believe them whenever they're all this moral grandstanding language. For years, they let Republicans adopt the politically popular message of leave it to the states. Because, but they did. That was HW, that was the message from him. That was George W. Bush.
There was a lot of heartbeat build. There was a lot of, it was easier for Republicans to talk about this when it was theoretical.
Yes.
And they were much more strident. And, they would go to these confabs that were all about, focused on religious right, whatever. And they would say very extreme things. And not all of them, right? Not 100%. But many of them.
Fair.
Yeah, and so now when Trump is like, we're great for reproductive rights, you don't hear even those people who really made their whole identity about being associated with this issue, you don't hear a damn peep out of them.
Fair enough. But more what I'm saying is, for years, why was it politically acceptable to con the American people into believing that the Republican Party said leave it to the states? But then, immediately after Roe, Mike Pence is like, no, we didn't mean leave it to the states. We actually meant we want a national abortion ban. You're like, well, hold on a second. Also, a friend pointed out to me, they never would have said leave it to the states if they knew that America would become 10x more secular in the decade period of the 2010s, and that actually when you do leave it to the states, even hard red states are like, yeah, we're good, actually. We're going to keep the Roe consensus. And then second, here's another thing. Again, we live in a democratic system. We had a Republican primary. There were multiple candidates in that race, Ron DeSantis amongst them, who signed a heartbeat bill. He lost. So what do you want? It's like, if you're so good, you should have voted for him, but you didn't. Most of you, data tells us, you voted for Donald Trump. Well, what do you want to say? The guy who is transactional in all of his political relationships. So, okay, if you're so powerful, then you should go elect somebody who actually agrees with you in the Republican Party. Here, even JD, who got the SBA list endorsement, he's not an idiot. You can read a poll and you can just say, all right, if we want to win, there's certain things that we're just going to have to say, or we're going to have to change our position on. And so the point is that, and this is always a problem with taking moral issues and trying to blend them with a democratic society. And I don't know why it is acceptable for every other group in all of politics, people like me, don't like weed, or hold other, very unpopular positions who just sometimes have to resign it and say, you know what, public doesn't agree with me on it. So be it. Why is that so difficult?
Because, again, I feel weird defending the pro-life position because I don't agree with them. But I see it almost in the total reverse, which is they see it as like a core civil right. And there's a reason we have a constitution, and we have certain core rights that are protected, that are supposed to be above and beyond the slings and arrows of just, not just, but of a democratic popularity contest. And so if you view it through that lens, then you're like, no, this is core to me. I believe this is like a civil rights type of issue. And no, I don't think we should be voting in Mississippi about whether or not Black people should have rights. That should be something that's enshrined and that's guaranteed. I relate to that because I feel that way certainly about the pro-choice position. I don't think we should be voting on whether women in Texas should be able to, be forced to bleed out in the parking lot in order to obtain a medically necessary abortion. I don't think we should be voting on whether that young woman in Kentucky should be forced to bear her stepdad's baby who raped her when she was 12 years old. I don't think that these things should be up for a, popular Democratic Party, democratic process debate. And so I see where they're coming from, even as I disagree, because they're like, you all claimed, and I know there was some rhetoric about leave it to the states, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
but the overwhelming message from the Republican Party was that abortion is a moral wrong, period, end of story. Remember, what was that lady's name who did the whole on the debate stage? Fiorina, what was her name?
Carly Fiorina.
She did the whole thing on the debate stage about the it's a fake video, but anyway, about the babies and they're being torn out and the fetus is torn apart. They painted this as a visceral, moral, civil rights type issue. And so, I think it is actually shows a lot more character. The people like Seth Dillon who were saying, no, you claimed that this was akin to like slavery, akin to a genocide, akin to a Holocaust. And then the minute it's politically inconvenient for you, you just wave your hands and move off of that rhetoric completely. Like, yeah, we didn't really mean that. We just, California, do your thing. We don't really care. Reproductive rights, et cetera, et cetera. So Mike Pence, as an example, I was never, maybe this is because I always, suspected like I was listening to their rhetoric about how this is moral wrong. Like I never thought, oh, they just want to leave it to the states. I thought, no, they want this to be banned everywhere because that's what their rhetoric indicated. And Mike Pence was very consistent on that. Mike Pence is an abortion hardliner and always has been. So I do think it's unprincipled. I do think it exposes that like they didn't really mean it. These politicians didn't really mean it. And they're more committed to the personality of Donald Trump and whatever than they are to what they previously framed as a core moral issue.
Fair enough. I would just say, hey, what does the civil rights movement teach us throughout the 1950s when civil rights was very unpopular? You think the civil rights people were just like, oh, actually, we're going to morally grandstand, or are we going to continue to work through the democratic system and eventually accomplish our goal? So you guys got what you wanted. That's the thing. For years, Roe versus Wade, Roe versus Wade. You literally got what you wanted, but apparently that's not enough. So, I just have a lot less sympathy for all of these like purity tests and others, where if you were to ask them about any other issue, they would say exactly what I said. But for this one, I mean, look, I do get it, right? Me hating weed is not the same. But in a democratic system, which is not supposed to consider religiosity, then yeah, actually, it does look like that. So they, at the end of the day, you have to contend in the American political system. This is something which I think they would lecture to any leftist who were to have the similar like moral arguments about defund the police or any other national argument. Right. There you go. Yeah, exactly. And they, I guarantee
that's part of why I'm also sympathetic.
But they would have a different view of that.
Trump has them between a rock and a hard place, and he knows that. Like they're checkmated. They have nowhere else to go, and so he knows they're going to suck it up and vote for him.
Right.
And Democratic Party knows that most of the, pro-Palestine activists at the end of the day are going to vote for him because Trump is going to be worse. And it's like a checkmate kind of a situation that they're in. So I do have empathy for them. I did not expect to have this show be me going to the mat defending Seth Dillon of the Babylon Bee and Saagar going after him, but I guess that's what makes the show interesting.
If that's what makes the show interesting, and I think this is probably, I think we have not a huge pro-life audience, but there's some people in here. I would just ask, that you consider everything we talked about here. Because I think at the very least, there are going to be a lot of conversations like this, and amongst normal folks who I know who don't engage with the political process at all, You know, abortion is a noose around the neck of the Republican Party. I said it, and I was so, and that's another thing. These people attacked me so much after Roe versus Wade when I was like, hey, this is a problem. It's a problem. And then after 2022, they all wanted to retcon the losses as it was just Trump's fault and it was stop the steal. I'm like, no. It's not just stop the steal.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
It was abortion, okay?
It was the whole picture of being a fringe extremist party, and all of those things went together. Yeah. And to your point about, Trump has no one to blame but himself for this outcome.
I agree, yes.
He is the one who put those people on the court. He ran on it, he did it, and there you go. So yes, you can say the words reproductive rights all you want. No one is going to trust you or any other Republican Party member with their reproductive rights. Yeah. Not happening.
Exactly. Yeah, that is very true. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.